Raila Odinga, grief and healing. Today, let us have a healing conversation. When a great tree falls, the forest does not fall silent, it sighs. And in that sigh, every leaf seems to remember the wind that once passed through it. That's how many places in Kenya feel right now, a quiet ache. Some call it a loss, some call it disbelief, but beneath it all, it's grief. Hi, I am Tim, and this is TimPsych Mind in Minutes. Here we talk mental health and emotional wellness in plain language. Psychologists understand that when a community loses a symbolic figure, the grief behaves like a ripple. It starts in the personal space, but quickly spreads into the collective minds. This is called collective mourning. You see, grief isn't only about death, it's about separation, the gap between what was and what still wants to be. And when someone like Raila departs, the grief runs through layers of society. For his family, it is personal. For ODM, it's political. For millions of Kenyans, it's historical. Because for decades, he wasn't just a man, he was an idea moving on 2 feet. In psychology, we know that when a symbol becomes personal, loss feels multiplied. We grieve both the person and what they represented inside us. Let's start with his family. They've been thrust into a strange space, part private mourners, part public hosts, expected to make coherent and moving speeches. Imagine grieving when cameras flash, microphones hover, and every word becomes a headline. The world expects dignity and strength, even when your heart is breaking. That's what we psychologists call role conflicts, when emotional truth and social expectation pull in opposite directions. Healing begins when those two can meet. Yet, healing does not come from suppressing tears. It comes from remembering privately what the world saw publicly. To his family, he wasn't enigma. He was husband, father, brother. And the journey of healing starts when they can sit in silence and let those ordinary memories breathe again. Laughter at the dinner table, quiet advice in the garden, or just the sound of his footsteps coming home. Then there is ODM, the movement he built, the party that carried his name and his fire. Grief here is complicated. It is not just sadness, it is also uncertainty. Because Raila wasn't merely a leader, he was an organizing principle. ODM now faces a delicate task to mourn and reorganize at the same time, to separate the man from the mission, not to replace, but to continue. Yes, even politicians need therapy of the soul. Legacy forums, Remembrance gatherings open dialogues not as political rallies, but as spaces of reflection. Because an institution that cannot pause to mourn eventually forgets why it existed. And then there is us, the people, the citizens who argued for him, against him, or simply grew up hearing his name at every election. Whether you loved him or disagreed with him, you knew that Kenya's story could not be told without mentioning his. And even for those who didn't like him, there is often a strange silence now, a psychological space that feels unfamiliar. We call this ambiguous grief, when the loss of a familiar opponent still leaves a void, because his presence shapes our conversations, our debates, even our frustrations. When that disappears, it can feel like losing a reference point, the person who defined what we stood for or against. That too is grief, though it wears a different face. And that's what makes this kind of grief unique. It's national. We may call this collective fatigue, the emotional hangover that follows shared trauma. It is invisible but real, and acknowledging it is in itself a national therapy. A nation's emotional immune system also takes a hit. It doesn't delete memory, it reflects meaning. To heal as a people, we must keep his memory alive. That's how national healing begins, by turning mourning into meaning. Psychologically, this is what we call meaning reconstruction, the process of finding continuity after loss. It turns pain into purpose and memory into strength. Healing then is not about moving on. It is about moving forward with. We carry his lessons, his stubborn hope, his courage to speak when silence was safer. ODM will carry it politically. His family will carry it personally. And the nation, all of us, will carry it emotionally as part of our civic DNA. From a psychological view, the healthiest nations are not those that forget quickly, but those that remember wisely. Memory, when processed, becomes resilience. When denied, it becomes tension. When a great tree falls, the forest sighs, but it also makes room for light. Let's not rush the sigh. Far from it, let us also let the light find its way through. Because grief in the end is not just about death, it's about the living finding the courage to continue. And maybe, just maybe, that's the truest way to mourn and to honor a shujaa in real time. I am Tim, and this has been TimPsych Mind in Minutes. This from the Bible. But as for you who fear my name, The Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings, and you shall go forth playing joyfully like calves from a stall. This is Malachi 4:2. More truth, less stigma here on TimPsych.